On June 15, 2025, multiple news outlets reported that U.S. President Donald Trump vetoed an Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, according to U.S. officials speaking anonymously to Reuters and other media organizations. This revelation emerged amid escalating tensions between Israel and Iran, marked by a series of Israeli airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities and Iranian retaliatory missile attacks on Israeli cities. The reported veto reflects a complex interplay of U.S. foreign policy priorities, Israel's aggressive stance against Iran's nuclear ambitions, and the Trump administration's efforts to avoid a broader regional conflict. This article delves into the details of the reported event, its historical and geopolitical context, the motivations behind Trump's decision, reactions from Israeli and Iranian officials, and the potential consequences for the Middle East and global diplomacy. Historical context, U.S. Israel and Iran relations. U.S. Iran relations, a legacy of tension. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been fraught since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which overthrew the U.S.-backed Shah and established a theocratic regime under Ayatollah Khamenei. The subsequent hostage crisis, in which 52 American diplomats were held for 444 days, set the stage for decades of animosity. The U.S. imposed sanctions on Iran, accusing it of sponsoring terrorism and pursuing nuclear weapons. Iran, in turn, viewed the U.S. as an imperialist power intent on undermining its sovereignty. During President Trump's first term, 2017 to 2021, U.S.-Iran relations deteriorated significantly. In 2018, Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, which had been negotiated under President Barack Obama to curb Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Trump's maximum pressure campaign reimposed crippling sanctions, aiming to force Iran into a more comprehensive agreement that addressed its ballistic missile program and regional influence. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani, head of Iran's Quds Force, in January 2020, ordered by Trump, further escalated tensions, bringing the two nations to the brink of war. By 2025, the Trump administration's second term sought to balance its hardline stance with diplomatic overtures. Reports indicate Trump hoped to resume nuclear negotiations with Iran, which were cancelled in Oman on June 15, 2025, due to Israel strikes. This context suggests Trump's veto of the Israeli plan was partly motivated by a desire to preserve diplomatic channels. Israel-Iran rivalry, a regional power struggle. Israel and Iran have been locked in a shadow war for decades, driven by ideological opposition, regional influence, and Iran's nuclear ambitions. Israel views Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, fearing that a nuclear-armed Iran could embolden its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, to attack Israel. Iran, meanwhile, sees Israel as a U.S.-backed aggressor and a threat to its Islamic revolutionary ideals. Israel has conducted numerous covert operations against Iran, including cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, e.g., Stuxnet, assassinations of nuclear scientists, and airstrikes on Iranian targets in Syria. In 2025, Israel escalated its campaign with direct strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, including facilities in Natanz and Fordow, as well as energy assets like the South Pars gas field. These attacks, described as an attempt to decapitate Iran's nuclear program, triggered Iranian missile strikes on Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other Israeli cities, killing at least 13 Israelis and injuring hundreds. The proposed assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader since 1989, would have represented a dramatic escalation. As Iran's ultimate authority, Khamenei wields significant influence over its military, judiciary, and foreign policy. His death could destabilize Iran's regime, potentially leading to internal chaos or a hardline backlash, both of which could have unpredictable regional consequences. U.S.-Israel alliance, a delicate balance. The U.S. and Israel share a deep strategic partnership, rooted in shared democratic values, intelligence cooperation, and military support. The U.S. provides Israel with billions in annual aid and advanced weaponry, including systems like THAAD and Iron Dome, which have bolstered Israel's defense against Iranian missiles. However, the alliance is not without friction. Israel's unilateral actions, such as strikes on Iranian targets, sometimes complicate U.S. efforts to maintain regional stability. During Trump's first term, he strengthened U.S.-Israel ties by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moving the U.S. embassy there, and brokering the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states. In his second term, Trump continued to support Israel but faced pressure to avoid entanglement in foreign conflicts, a key promise of his 2024 campaign. The veto of the Khamenei assassination plan highlights this tension. While Trump backs Israel's right to self-defense, he appears wary of actions that could draw the U.S. into a wider war. The reported veto details and context what happened. According to multiple reports, Israel informed the Trump administration in early June 2025 that it had developed a credible plan to assassinate Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The plan was presented as an opportunity to strike at Iran's leadership amid ongoing Israeli attacks on its nuclear and military infrastructure. U.S. officials, speaking anonymously, said Trump explicitly rejected the proposal, conveying to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that it was not a good idea. Reuters first broke the story on June 15, 2025, citing two U.S. officials. One senior official stated, "Have the Iranians killed an American yet? No. Until they do, we're not even talking about going after the political leadership." This suggests Trump's decision was guided by a threshold for U.S. involvement, direct harm to American interests. The Associated Press, NBC News, CBS News, and other outlets corroborated the story, citing their own U.S. sources. The White House reportedly feared that assassinating Khamenei would inflame the conflict and potentially destabilize the region. This concern was heightened by the ongoing Israel-Iran conflict, which had entered its third day of missile exchanges by June 15, 2025. Israel's strikes targeted Iran's defense ministry, nuclear sites, and energy infrastructure, while Iran's retaliatory attacks caused significant damage in Israel. Timing and circumstances. The veto came at a critical juncture. Israel's Operation Rising Lion, launched on June 13, 2025, aimed to halt Iran's nuclear program, which Israeli intelligence reportedly believed had accelerated after the October 7, 2023, Hamas attack on Israel. The strikes targeted key facilities, including an airbase in Mashhad, 1,400 miles from Israel, and a refueling plane at Mashhad Airport. Iran's response included missile barrages on Israeli cities, with air raid sirens sounding across Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Amid this escalation, Trump was navigating domestic and international pressures. Domestically, his base, represented by figures like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Charlie Kirk, and Tucker Carlson, urged restraint in foreign conflicts, aligning with Trump's America First agenda. Internationally, Trump was preparing for a G7 summit in Canada, where the Israel-Iran conflict was expected to dominate discussions. He also held a 50-minute phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on June 14, 2025, discussing potential mediation between Israel and Iran. Trump's rationale. Trump's veto appears to have been driven by several factors: avoiding regional escalation. The Trump administration viewed Khamenei's assassination as a step too far, likely to provoke a severe Iranian response, including attacks on U.S. bases in the region. Iran had already threatened to target U.S., UK, and French assets if they supported Israel's defense efforts. Preserving diplomatic options. Trump expressed optimism about brokering a deal between Israel and Iran, citing his claimed success in de-escalating India-Pakistan tensions in May 2025, a claim disputed by India. Killing Khamenei would have derailed any chance of resuming nuclear talks, which Trump saw as a potential legacy achievement. Domestic political considerations. Trump's 2024 campaign promised to end U.S. involvement in foreign wars. Supporting an assassination plot could alienate his base, as warned by Charlie Kirk, who feared a massive schism in MAGA. Senator Rand Paul praised Trump's restraint, arguing that the U.S. should avoid entanglement in the conflict. Strategic calculations. Trump's comment about waiting for Iranian attacks on Americans suggests a pragmatic approach, prioritizing U.S. interests over Israel's maximalist goals. This aligns with his broader foreign policy of avoiding costly interventions unless directly provoked. Reactions to the veto. Israeli response. Israeli officials offered mixed reactions. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a Fox News interview on June 15, 2025, neither confirmed nor denied the plan but dismissed false reports of conversations that never happened. He emphasized Israel's autonomy, stating, "We do what we need to do, and I think the United States knows what is good for the United States." Netanyahu's spokesperson, Omer Dostrai, called the reports fake, while National Security Advisor Tsachi Hanegbi labeled them fake news of the highest order. However, Israel's ambassador to the U.S. Yehiel Leiter, took a more ambiguous stance, suggesting that nobody who's threatening the destruction of Israel should be off the target list. Netanyahu also hinted at regime change as a possible outcome of the conflict, noting that the Iranian regime is very weak. These statements suggest Israel may have been testing U.S. boundaries with the assassination proposal, while maintaining deniability to avoid diplomatic fallout. Iranian response. Iran did not directly address the assassination reports, but its actions and rhetoric underscored its defiance. Supreme Leader Khamenei delivered a televised speech on June 13, 2025, condemning Israel's strikes and vowing resilience. President Masoud Pezeshkian threatened a more severe and decisive response to Israeli attacks, while Iran's foreign ministry denied sending messages to Israel via Cyprus, signaling a collapse in back-channel diplomacy. Iran's missile attacks on Israel, which killed 11 people and injured dozens, demonstrated its willingness to escalate. Tehran also warned the US, UK, and France against supporting Israel's defenses, holding the U.S. responsible for its military aid to Israel. The veto likely went unnoticed in Iran's public discourse, overshadowed by the ongoing conflict and domestic challenges, including blackouts costing $250 million daily due to energy infrastructure damage. U.S. Domestic reactions in the U.S., reactions split along ideological lines. Senator Rand Paul praised Trump's restraint, arguing that the U.S. should not be involved in the Israel-Iran conflict. Conversely, Senator Lindsey Graham advocated a hardline approach, urging Trump to go all in on destroying Iran's nuclear program if diplomacy failed, including providing bombs or even flying alongside Israeli forces. Trump's base expressed divergent views on X. Some users, like at PST Conservative, criticized the veto, arguing that Iran's leadership should be targeted. Others, like at Call White, used the veto to counter claims that Israel acted without U.S. approval. These reactions highlight the divide within Trump supporters, with some favoring isolationism and others backing Israel's aggressive posture. International community. The international response was muted, likely due to the sensitivity of the issue. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan offered to mediate between Israel and Iran in a call with Trump on June 15, 2025. Russia's Vladimir Putin, after speaking with Trump, expressed willingness to facilitate negotiations, with Kremlin insider Kirill Dmitriev suggesting Russia could play a key role. The cancellation of U.S. Iran nuclear talks in Oman, announced by Oman's foreign minister on June 14, 2025, reflected the diplomatic fallout. Iran's refusal to negotiate while under attack, communicated via Qatar and Oman, underscored the challenges of de-escalation. The G7 summit, scheduled for June 15 to 17, 2025, was expected to address the crisis, with Trump's veto likely influencing discussions on U.S. leadership in the region. Implications of the veto for U.S. foreign policy. Trump's veto reinforces his preference for diplomacy over military escalation, at least until U.S. interests are directly threatened. By distancing the U.S. from Israel's assassination plan, Trump avoided alienating Iran's leadership, preserving a slim chance for nuclear negotiations. However, his simultaneous warning to Iran, if we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before, signals a readiness to respond decisively if provoked. The veto also highlights Trump's effort to balance competing pressures, supporting Israel, satisfying his isolationist base, and projecting strength to adversaries. His claim of brokering peace between India and Pakistan, though disputed, reflects his desire to be seen as a dealmaker. However, the veto risks straining U.S.-Israel relations, as Netanyahu's ambiguous response suggests frustration with U.S. constraints. For Israel-Iran relations, the veto likely had little immediate impact on Israel-Iran hostilities, which continued unabated. Israel's strikes on Iran's energy and nuclear infrastructure, and Iran's missile attacks on Israel, indicate both sides are prepared for prolonged conflict. The assassination plan, even if shelved, underscores Israel's willingness to consider extreme measures, potentially foreshadowing future attempts if opportunities arise. Netanyahu's hint at regime change as a possible outcome suggests Israel's long-term goal may extend beyond neutralizing Iran's nuclear program to weakening its government. Iran's domestic vulnerabilities, economic strain, energy shortages, and public discontent, could amplify the impact of Israel's campaign, but they also risk unifying Iranians against external aggression. For regional stability, the veto may have averted a catastrophic escalation, as Khamenei's assassination could have triggered retaliatory attacks on U.S. and Israeli targets, potentially involving Iran's proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis. However, the ongoing conflict threatens regional stability, with oil prices rising 7% due to fears of disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, through which 21% of global LNG and 14 million barrels of crude oil pass daily. The conflict's ripple effects are already evident. Iran's energy crisis, exacerbated by Israeli strikes, has forced austerity measures, while Israel's economy faces strain from prolonged mobilization and missile damage. The involvement of third parties, Russia, Turkey, and potentially China, could complicate de-escalation efforts, as each pursues its own interests in the region. For global diplomacy, the veto underscores the challenges of multilateral diplomacy in a polarized world. The cancellation of U.S. Iran talks in Oman and Iran's refusal to negotiate under attack highlight the fragility of nuclear diplomacy. Trump's openness to Russian mediation, while pragmatic, risks alienating allies who view Russia as an adversary. The G7 summit offers a platform to address the crisis, but differing priorities, U.S. restraint, European caution, and Israel's aggression, may hinder a unified response. The veto also raises questions about U.S. credibility as a mediator, as Trump's dual rhetoric of peace and threats creates uncertainty about his intentions. Critical analysis, veracity and implications of the reports. Veracity of the reports. The reports of Trump's veto rely on anonymous U.S. officials, raising questions about their reliability. The consistency across multiple outlets, Reuters, AP, NBC, CBS, and others, lends credibility, but the lack of named sources and Israel's denial suggest caution. Netanyahu's spokesperson and national security advisor dismissed the reports as fake, which could indicate a desire to downplay a sensitive operation or genuine disbelief in its existence. The timing of the leak, coinciding with the G7 summit and escalating hostilities, suggests it may have been intended to signal U.S. restraint to Iran or reassure domestic audiences of Trump's non-interventionist stance. Alternatively, it could reflect internal U.S. divisions, with officials leaking to influence policy or undermine Israel's actions. Without declassified documents or official confirmation, the reports remain inconclusive. Strategic implications. If true, the veto reflects a calculated decision to prioritize U.S. interests over Israel's immediate objectives. By rejecting the assassination plan, Trump avoided a scenario that could have drawn the U.S. into a costly war, preserving his political capital and diplomatic leverage. However, it may embolden Iran to continue its missile attacks, perceiving U.S. reluctance to escalate. For Israel, the veto could strain trust in the U.S. as a reliable partner, particularly if Netanyahu believes Trump's restraint undermines Israel's security. Israel's history of acting unilaterally, e.g., the 1981 Osirak reactor strike in Iraq, suggests it may pursue similar plans in the future, with or without U.S. approval. For Iran, the veto is unlikely to alter its calculus unless paired with tangible diplomatic incentives. The regime's survival depends on projecting strength, and any perceived weakness could fuel internal dissent. The assassination plot, even if unexecuted, may reinforce Iran's narrative of external threats, rallying hardliners against negotiations. Conclusion: President Donald Trump's reported veto of an Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as revealed on June 15, 2025, underscores the delicate balance of U.S. foreign policy in a volatile Middle East. The decision reflects Trump's desire to avoid a broader conflict, preserve diplomatic options, and align with his domestic base's aversion to foreign wars. However, it also highlights tensions within the U.S.-Israel alliance and the challenges of managing Iran's nuclear ambitions amid escalating hostilities. The veto's long-term impact depends on the trajectory of the Israel-Iran conflict, the success of diplomatic efforts, and the ability of regional and global powers to de-escalate. While Trump's restraint may have averted immediate catastrophe, the underlying issues, Iran's nuclear program, Israel's security concerns, and U.S. strategic interests, remain unresolved. The Middle East stands at a crossroads, with the potential for either a breakthrough in diplomacy or a descent into wider war. As of June 16, 2025, the situation remains fluid, with missile exchanges continuing and diplomatic channels strained. The international community, led by the G7 and potential mediators like Russia and Turkey, faces a daunting task in restoring stability. Trump's veto, if confirmed, will be remembered as a pivotal moment in his second term, shaping perceptions of his leadership and the U.S.'s role in the world.